routine and uneventful, or it should have been. As Shaw stood watch at the Rising Sun's helm, one of the Portuguese sailors on duty with him, Pereira, engaged him in conversation. Pereira inquired about the ship's compass and where each of the points on that compass led. The boatswain thought no harm of the conversation and explained that the uppermost point went to Orinoco in the Spanish colony of Venezuela. Tiring of the conversation, Shaw asked Pereira to fetch him a dram of rum. The sailor went down in the hold and returned 10 minutes later with no dram, but with more of the same questions. Shaw offered the same answers, and Pereira returned below deck. 15 minutes later, all hell broke loose. Shaw heard a great noise coming from the ship's cabins. "Murder! Murder!" the cries rang out. Pereira and Ferdinand da Costa had snuck into Jackson's and Ladain's cabins and stabbed them. Meanwhile, Thomas Lucas attacked John McCoy, Ladain's clerk, in his berth, stabbing him 9 times. The captain and merchant slipped out of their cabins, but as Jackson began ascending the ladder above, Lucas saw him and stabbed him 3 more times. Jackson made it on deck, and Ladain, following Jackson up the ladder, suffered 5 more stab wounds. As Lucas was distracted stabbing the captain and supercargo, McCoy, slashed to tatters, crawled deep into the hold of the ship. The screams jolted the ship's mate, William Blake, out of his slumber. As he went on deck to see what was happening, one of the 3 mutineers stabbed him in the shoulder. He curled into a ball on the deck and looked over to see Ladain nearly dead and in a pool of his own blood and gore. The merchant whimpered, "I am dead," and perished a few minutes later. Jackson, likewise lying on the deck, was clinging to an axe that da Costa had dropped when he followed Ladain up the ladder. The captain responded to Ladain's cry, shouting, "I am dead! I am dead!" Lucas ordered Jackson killed. Da Costa snatched the axe from Jackson's hands and began chopping. Pereira, meanwhile, had stolen Jackson's cutlass from his cabin and turned his attention to John Shaw. He began slashing the boatswain wildly, cutting him all over his body. When Pereira turned his attention back to Jackson and Ladain, Shaw was able to slip below deck. There, watching in horror and confusion, were 15 enslaved Africans, most of them children. The Rising Sun's voyage to Suriname was not just any smuggling run, but an illicit slave-trading voyage. And now the remainders of that venture stood as terrified and unwitting witnesses to a bloody mutiny. Shaw cowered in his bunk as the murders continued above. For the mutineers, it was time to start disposing of bodies. 2 of them gathered around Jackson, still clinging to life despite multiple stab wounds and the tremendous pain inflicted by da Costa's axe. They picked the captain up, one at his feet and the other at his shoulders. They swung his body to gain momentum and threw him overboard. Jackson screamed as he plunged into the dark abyss. Mutiny on the Rising Sun reconstructs the origins, events, and eventual fate of the Rising Sun's smuggling voyage. Using the events of that horrible night in June 1743 as a starting point, it narrates a human history of smuggling. Sources surrounding the case allow us to study Newark Jackson, George Ladain, the mutineers, the other men on board the schooner, business associates on land, the widows who dealt with the mutiny's fallout, and the enslaved people the Rising Sun trafficked. All these people lived in a world where smuggling stood at the center of their lives. The case of the Rising Sun illustrates how larger forces created the conditions for smuggling, but individual actors, often driven by raw ambition and little regard for the consequences of their actions, designed, refined, and perpetuated this illicit but routine commerce. The records from the mutiny ultimately shine a bright light on an 18th century international smuggling ring. The Rising Sun was a small part of a system of illegal commerce that underpinned the economy of colonial America and the early modern Atlantic world. By the middle decades of the 18th century, smuggling formed a cornerstone of the Atlantic trade system and was central to the economy of Britain's North American colonies. Engaging in illicit trade in this period, however, was openly and widely practiced, making it much different from the black markets and underground economies of the 21st century. The Atlantic empires of Britain